no slush fund, and they seem to believe that's the end of it. Or, more importantly, they want to pretend
Howdy
to
folks,
believe
Corky
and
Duke
want you to
Farminator
pretend to
here.
believe that's the
Come
end.
with me if you want to farm.
Because,
This is
well,
Farming Simulator
there's your
22,
dollars.
Michigan Farms Map, Schafer's Ag Service, part 109 Bravo. This is an accurate replica of the farm I grew up on.
MS Now? What a
And I'm back.
terrible show. They have the worst people on the channel.
We got some work going on in the apartment, trying to fix it up. Got a couple of problems with the big hole.
No, go ahead. So, I don't know.
Hole
There
in
are
the
no other
floor in the
avenues that
kitchen.
Donald Trump knows of to funnel money to the people that he wants to corruptly funnel money to. But there's also nothing that says they can't bring the slush fund back to life. And Trump may not know it, although I suspect he does. But here's the important thing. Blanche's DOJ is already paying out your tax dollars in salaries to we told you just last week $1 million payout. $1 million. How would you like to have $1 million from the government out of nowhere? To an anti-abortion access activist who was convicted of conspiring to prevent access to a clinic, but was pardoned by Trump last year. Now, there's also the matter of Trump's immunity deal, right? There was two parts of this deal, and that, the immunity deal for Trump, in a sense, it lives on. Donald Trump's sons, his umbrella corporation, get tax immunity. They can just skip last year's tax bill altogether. Remember, last week when Tillis and Cornyn were demanding written assurances that were better than these, they said someone in the White House was holding things up, someone who apparently didn't want anything changed in that settlement. Guess we'll never find out who it was.
I didn't look at it. All I know is that Todd Blanche is great. He's going to do a great job. Everybody knows it. And I understand there's been a sign-off. But I don't know what they agreed. I think Todd Blanche agreed to reconfirm things that he's already said. And what he said was okay.
Again, he sounds pretty happy, but why wouldn't he, right? He gets his own personal attorney permanently installed at justice, or at least, actually confirmed. He gets the Republican Senate's affirmative stamp of approval on him, let's be clear, essentially, and I don't think there's a better way to say this, like robbing the American taxpayer of hundreds of millions in personal and corporate tax liabilities that are hanging over his head. Remember, he's been obsessed with this from the beginning. And he can still pay off some of his weaponization victims out of the Department of Justice /9. In exchange, Tillis and Cornyn finally got what they wanted. And this is really the key thing to understand about this story, and understand about those two men you see there, and the character of those two men and who they are. They just wanted a fig leaf to share with all the other Republicans, particularly facing re-election in this cycle, to say, see, we fought the toxic, corrupt, self-dealing with tax.
I can get wood chips out of there.
At least we fought the most outrageous thing that Trump
I
has
never
come up with,
really realized that before.
which was to use your money to pay off people that bashed in the heads of cops. And at the center of all this is a man who's already demonstrated himself manifestly unfit to be Attorney General of the United States. I mean, it's not even a question, right? This guy fails in every possible way. He bent over backwards for Trump when it came to soft pedaling the Epstein files. In fact, a federal judge appears to believe that they're still in violation of the law signed as of now. He was the one that put together the sweetheart deal with the lone person ever being convicted of being an accomplice to Jeffrey Epstein, who's Ghislaine Maxwell, right? Who was helping him traffic the girls that he abused. Because Todd Blanche wanted her there. He's overseeing prosecutions of Trump's perceived political critics, many of them often under obviously ridiculous circumstances. He's currently facing ethics complaints and a really stirring condemnation from a federal judge over the role in the IRS settlement, which he was the point guy for. Should this guy be the top law enforcement officer in the country is a very easy question. There should not be a single vote for it. But the thing is, Tom Tillis and John Cornyn, well, they caved, even though they literally nothing to lose, right? They're both on their way out of Washington. But the lesson of all this is that they caved because they're Republicans, and they like Donald Trump and want to enable him. At the national level, there really aren't any good Republicans under Donald Trump. I'm sorry, but at the national level, and there are some exceptions on particular issues, Thomas Massey, supports Donald Trump. They want to see, believe in, are glad that Donald Trump is using our government in the way he's using it. They work every day to facilitate that so that he can use it for self-enrichment, mass deportation, enormous tax cuts for wealthy interests, deregulation for those same wealthy interests, and wars in the Middle East.
That's an old field. Okay, I do have one old field.
I've been covering Republican politics for decades. It's the agenda of the
I'm going to make
Republican
field
Party.
13 old.
It just is. It's not just Trump. The whole party is rotten. Congressman Jamie Raskin, Democrat of Maryland, is the ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee, and he joins me now. I don't think either of us in this conversation are particularly surprised as we're Cornyn and Tillis.
Need the straw.
In fact, they kept saying the phrase, "We want to get to yes," like, please just give us a fig leaf, just put this in writing. To argue against myself and play devil's advocate, is there anything to the paper issued by Blanche today that you think is binding?
No, I think it's worse even than what you're saying, Chris, because it's an attempt to deceive the public that somehow there's been a solution. And in fact, there's nothing to it. For one thing, Donald Trump can bring a lawsuit on the settlement to enforce it because they refuse to rescind and dissolve the settlement. So he's got a legally binding agreement that he can sue on. Also, if you look at the language of it and you look at Todd Blanche's language, it's all, there is no fund. It's all present tense. There is no fund now, and so on. Nothing about there will be no fund, but in any event, even if they signed that, something saying there will be no anti-weaponization fund, as you observed, they didn't say anything about just using the Judgment Fund of the United States or any other fund. If you're a Proud Boy, an Oath Keeper, another convicted January 6th felon who beat up a police officer, you don't care what the check is drawn on. You don't care which government fund is ripping off the taxpayers. You just want to be a mega millionaire, right? That's what you want. And so they have already written a number of checks out of the Judgment Fund, the general fund that is there for actual verdicts against the United States. So his disgraced former National Security Advisor, Michael Flynn, got a check for $1.25 million, which apparently is the going rate. Carter Page got $1.25 million. The family of Ashley Babbitt got $5 million, despite the fact that two different federal probes determined that her killing, however tragic it was, and it was tragic, was nonetheless justified because of the mob violence and the people chanting "Hang Mike Pence" in an attempt to storm the House and the Senate chambers. So, and you know, Michael Flynn had just lost his case, and then Todd Blanche's Department of Justice settled with him the claims he had just lost, which the Department of Justice won. So it's very clear where they're going. Donald Trump keeps saying these are, you know, the most abused and wronged people in American history, which is an obscenity in itself. If he feels so bad about it, why doesn't he put half of the money he made over the last year to pay his own foot soldiers in his private militia? Yes. He should put the money up.
Yes, and he has made, as many people have reported, and based on public filings, like billions of dollars. I just want to come back to this thing you said, because I do think this is like, it's a little too clever by half on the fund. Just the
Total
Blanche
violation
memo,
of
it says
the emoluments clause of the
that the order is
Constitution.
rescinded and shall have no force and
That.
effect, right? For the avoidance of doubt, nothing in this order is intended to contradict or otherwise be contrary to prior representations by the Department of Justice that the fund is not operative. Again, on this day, August 22nd, 2026, no members were appointed in the past tense. Well, that's true. No funds were transferred. No process for receiving claims was established. No claims were paid. That is all true. That is a description of the history of the world that we live in. This order establishes beyond any reasonable doubt that there is no fund. There is nothing there, prospectively. There is nothing saying they won't make it. It's all in the present tense or in the past tense.
No, I mean, you know, Cornyn and Tillis basically got no consideration. You know, if that were a contract, it would be immediately declared void because there was no consideration. They didn't get anything out of it. And then when you look at the other half of it, which is obviously even more important to Donald Trump, the immunity for prosecution for tax fraud or any other criminal fraud or civil fraud or any criminal or civil offenses at all committed up until this point, they just reaffirm that he has won that through this totally fraudulent agreement, essentially between Donald Trump and Donald Trump. because Donald Trump insists upon the idea, and the courts are now going with it, that the president is unilaterally in control of the entire executive branch. So if he negotiates with the head of the IRS or the Treasury Secretary or the Attorney General and they come to an agreement, that's just an agreement between Trump and Trump. And Trump is going to win that every time, and that means the people lose. And yet that is still completely viable and valid. So I guess what you're saying is right, which is that this is just Republicans circling the wagons around Donald Trump again, which is why his poll numbers have plummeted to the lowest level of any second-term president, basically since Richard Nixon, or maybe since the polling began in the 1940s. And, I was thinking about my friend Sarah Chase, who wrote a really interesting book about corruption, and she said these are just political and financial networks of corruption. That's how mafia states work. And we have been driven to the point where the government of the United States of America is operating like a mafia state.
On this final point, I mean, you're a constitutional scholar before you entered Congress. My wife is a constitutional scholar. I am but a humble cable news host with a bachelor's degree in philosophy. But it seems to me that I'm not sure it's within the scope of the powers of a civil settlement to bar criminal prosecution or investigation by the state. Like, I just don't think you can do that. I don't think you say, like, well, we've settled, and so now the law doesn't apply, like the criminal law doesn't apply to you. Like, no, where do you get off? Like, you rip it up the second that there's a new president, right?
Well, Blanche keeps coming back to the idea that oftentimes when people settle with the government, if there's like a tax fraud prosecution, somebody will plead guilty to X and Y and they drop the charges on Z. Okay, that's true. That's a matter of fact. But look at what happened here. Donald Trump brought a suit that was brought by hundreds or thousands of other people about a leak of taxpayer information. The courts have determined, and the Department of Justice has been adamant in every other case except for Trump's, that there's no private right of action against the U.S. government when a third-party government contractor leaks your information. That guy, Charles Littlejohn, is in jail for what he did, but nobody has recovered a dollar from him. And yet, Trump, who sued for $10 billion, somehow has been granted this $1.8 billion slush fund. And then, in addition, they threw on immunity from all of these other offenses, either real or being investigated now, the agreement says, that have absolutely nothing to do with what Charles Littlejohn did. I mean, they're just completely logically unrelated, totally detached. So in that sense, you're right. I'm not sure it wouldn't hold up. It might not hold up. In any event, it is absolute highway robbery. We have a bill, and now every Democrat in the House has signed their name to a discharge petition to get it to the floor. And if you've got a Republican rep or senator who's been saying that they're opposed to this fraud against the court and fraud against the public, as Judge Williams said down in Florida, then you've got to get them to sign the discharge petition so we can permanently block it. Otherwise, Donald Trump gets away with the entire scam.
Yes, although see prior commentary from yours truly about the odds of that. But we'll see. Never stop trying. Congressman Jamie Raskin.
We'll see.
Appreciate it.
We'll see. Thank you, Chris.
Coming up, Senator Bernie Sanders on Michigan's big election and the wild new Trump plan to cut Medicare, specifically subsidies for drugs for seniors. That's next. Sometimes it seems like Donald Trump is trying to win some sort of bet about how much he can hurt Republicans' political chances in the midterms. Polls show him underwater on issues where he's been historically very strong, like the economy and immigration. Everyone across the board hates his war with Iran, which, by the way, continues today, even though there was promises that there was some deal. Of course not. But he's also doing nothing to try to turn those things around. Instead, just the opposite. Get this. His administration is now planning to end a Medicare subsidy that will mean higher drug costs for seniors, one of the biggest voting blocks, and also in a midterm year. That's given Democrats the chance to resurface this video of a closed press event in April the White House briefly posted by mistake.
It's not possible for us to take care of daycare, Medicaid, Medicare, all these individual things. They can do it on a state basis. You can't do it on a federal. We have to take care of one thing, military protection. We have to guard the country.
Wood Seed Planter and Farming Simulator 22 can I use on a map that has been,
Now,
had too
today
many
also
field
in the
adjustments, so
sort of
the AI
ongoing
doesn't
theme
plan
here, you
to.
highlighted a colleague of yours from Alabama calling Social Security a scam, which also seems like a strange closing message for midterm elections.
Yeah, it does. Look, bottom line is, I think the American people are catching on big time that Donald Trump is not only an oligarch concerned about his own family's wealth and the wealth of his fellow oligarchs, he's really at war
All
against
right,
the working class of this country.
I'm
The
stuck
idea
manually
that
planning this
when
stuff from now on.
prescription
That
drug
sucks.
prices are so high,
That really
you
sucks.
would cut Medicare Part D subsidies and raise prescription drug rates by up to 50% is really quite cruel and unbelievable from a political sense. In terms of Social Security, again, it is no great secret Republicans have never liked Social Security. What they essentially want to do is make massive cuts, raising the retirement age, cutting back on COLAs, and a variety of other approaches. But the bottom line is that we have got to save Social Security. We've got to expand Social Security benefits. And we can do that, Chris, by simply lifting the cap on taxable income so that the very wealthiest people start paying their fair share. Right now, you make $20 million a year, you contribute the same amount into Social Security as somebody who makes $187,000. Lift that cap, we can make Social Security solvent for 75 years and increase benefits. That's what we got to do.
Tomorrow is a primary day in a few different states. We're going to be doing special coverage here. I know that you have been on the road and you've endorsed some of the candidates, including Abdul El-Sayed, who right now polling average shows is leading his opponent, Hallie Stevens, Congresswoman in Michigan, by quite a bit. Here's an argument I've seen people make. I'm just going to show you this polling average. Now, I want to be clear here that none of this is written in stone, and I don't even think these are enormous differences. But there has been a trend to suggest that possibly Hallie Stevens would be a stronger general election nominee and candidate against Mike Rogers, who's going to be the Republican candidate, than Abdul El-Sayed. And I'm curious, obviously you agree with Abdul El-Sayed on the merits, right? But I'm curious your response to the argument that there's a risk here on the electability front in a state that is very close and that Donald Trump carried against a pretty strong candidate in Mike Rogers.
All right, here's my response, and it's twofold. Number one, I believe that when you have a candidate like Abdul El-Sayed talking about the issues that are relevant to working class people, whether they're Democrats, independents, or Republicans, you will win over people who previously voted for Trump. Independents and Republicans in Michigan cannot afford health care. They know the current system is broken. They support concepts like universal health care and Medicare for all. Republicans, independents in Michigan do not believe we should give $1 trillion in tax breaks to the 1% and throw 15 million people off of health care. They think, in fact, that the billionaires should start paying their fair share of taxes. That is what Abdul believes in. Republicans, independents, Democrats understand that we have a campaign finance system that is absolutely corrupt. Billionaires buy elections. Abdul tomorrow, and this is really quite incredible, if he wins, he's going to have to overcome a 9-to-1 spending ratio in terms of the billionaires want Hallie Stevens to win. Second point, what Democratic establishment people look at the voter electorate as a fixed number. We know when Mamdani won in New York City, he had 100,000 volunteers out on the street. He expanded the voter universe, brought new people, young people primarily, working class people into the process. Right now, Abdul has thousands of volunteers working. So I think what you will see is an increased voter turnout, and many of the new people who are participating in the general election will be younger people who traditionally don't vote, working class people who have been disenchanted with the Democratic Party. That is how and why El-Sayed will win the general election.
We'll see tomorrow night. I mean, obviously, we're not there yet, and polls have been wrong, so this is not at all a done deal. And as you said, there's been an enormous difference in the money spent because of super PAC money on the other side supporting Stephen. So I don't want to get ahead of us there. There's also there's a few other primaries, including there's one in Wisconsin. There's going to be one in Minnesota. Wisconsin one is a week from now. Can I ask you a question that I'm almost positive you have never been asked on television?
All right, let me hear it.
All right, here it is. The Democratic Socialists of America were founded by Michael Harrington. Now, you and Michael Harrington had a bit of a history, and you kind of ran in similar milieux. And Michael Harrington and you had opposite theories of the case about left liberal politics and the two-party system. Your theory of the case was that the Democratic Party had to be abandoned, you needed new parties, and you had to strike out on your own. Michael Harrington's case, which has sort of come to fruition, is that you needed to work within the Democratic Party, which was the kind of founding conceit of the Democratic Socialists of America, the left wing of the possible. You guys disagreed on this. Now here we are, all these years later. Michael, of course, passed quite a while ago. And that vision kind of coming to fruition within the Democratic Party. And I wonder if you want to say to Michael, wherever he may be now, if he was on the right side of that argument.
Michael didn't know him terribly well, but was a wonderful, wonderful man. He was involved with the Catholic Worker Program, as you may recall. Look, the reality right now is that it is very difficult to start a third party, a successful third party. It just requires all kinds of money and overcoming all kinds of state restrictions, etc. So I think right now what we are doing, and doing very well, is running candidates within the Democratic Party. I ran for president twice within the Democratic primary. And what you are seeing all across this country right now, Chris, is that people understand that the economy is rigged, the campaign finance system is corrupt. We are the only major country not to guarantee health care to all as a human right. People want change, and that is what progressives, what democratic socialists are talking about from coast to coast. We're winning elections, and with a little bit of luck, we can win tomorrow in Michigan and a week from now in Minnesota with Peggy Flanagan. So we are taking on everybody. We're taking on the billionaires and their super PACs. We're taking on the Democratic establishment. But I honestly believe that people now understand that status quo politics and tweaking around the edges is no longer good enough. We need bold solutions to the crises facing the working families of this country.
All right, Senator Bernie Sanders, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Be sure to tune in tomorrow at 8 p.m. Eastern for full team coverage on Michigan and beyond. I'll be there, Rachel Maddow, the rest of the crew, including Ali Velshi, who will be at the big board, and more. Still ahead, she folded like an umbrella. Donald Trump publicly trashing Jeanine Pirro over his latest reflecting pool fail. That's next. When it comes to Donald Trump, the fact that something isn't true has never stopped him from lying about it. We saw it in 2020 when Trump lost the election and he spread the lie that he had in fact defeated Joe Biden. The thing is, once his lawyers took those crazy lies to court, his claims immediately disintegrated. They lost over 60 cases. So Trump can spew lies, but there is still a minimal standard in court of law to prove your claim. And we're seeing it all over again with the story that we've been covering on this show, his reflecting. Earlier this summer, the Department of Justice indicted 67-year-old Olympian David Hearn, accusing him of damaging the Lincoln Memorial reflecting pool by supposedly pulling up sealant that had been installed in Trump's renovation project. Hearn, who's on our program, along with his lawyer Norm Eisen, faced a sentence of up to 10 years if he were convicted of the felony he was charged with. He denies he vandalized his pool. The charges track with Trump's recurring claims that people were damaging the reflecting pool with box cutters or knives or razors. And just like Trump's 2020 election lies, these charges were flimsy and lacked any evidence. Now, that did not stop former Fox host turned U.S. Attorney for D.C., Jeanine Pirro, from taking them on and giving hours of coverage on Trump's favorite propaganda outlet.
I hope Democrats enjoyed their little pool party because Judge Jeanine just shut it down. A lot of people, when this first happened with the pool, didn't believe the president that there was vandalism. That's not the case.
Yeah, it's not the case at all. In fact, I was at the reflecting pool yesterday. There not only is a vandalism that is reflected in today's indictment, but there is a...
These people are such fucking fools. They're not even smart enough to realize how stupid they are.
For several yards across the pool, and someone was intent on doing incredible damage to the pool.
Trump says somebody cut the lining they'd put on the bottom of this reflecting pool, and that's the cause of this.
Now they embrace algae, they embrace vandalism.
The vandalism is very real, despite what Tim Walz wants to say. It's an imaginary problem. No, it is not.
Turns out that suspect is the Olympian. 5 individuals are under investigation, and I'm waiting to see the video evidence of it. Or
So are we.
watch the redo.
Well, Jesse, it turns out they did botch the redo. On Friday, Piro's office dropped its case against Olympian David Hearn, saying new information had emerged showing the problems that had plagued Trump's pool was caused by, and I quote, botched installation, not vandalism. See, that's the thing about the court of law. There is a standard one has to meet. You cannot just completely lie your way through. But while Piro's shameless pursuit ended in humiliation for her, Trump is still alleging foul play with no evidence. He posted on social media, quote, I disagree 100% with Jeanine Pirro on the reflecting pool. I don't know what she was thinking. To me, it was a pure case of vandalism. There may have been some contractor difficulty, but the major damage was caused by vandals. Today, Trump went even further when asked if he's reconsidering Piro's role.
Frankly, I think she choked because the judge was really vicious. Instead of going after the people that did it, the judge went after her and went after her department. And I guess she choked. I don't know what the hell happened. I don't know what. You know, you're fake news. Don't ever talk again. I was disappointed with Jeanine Pirro.
You're a
really
fake president.
Disappointed with Jeanine Pirro. She folded like an umbrella.
Since that tirade, multiple outlets have reported that Trump is considering removing Pirro from her post over the reflecting pool debacle. This now is not confirmed. That reporting we can confirm that Pirro is seen leaving the White House this evening, wheeling a briefcase and a white box behind her after being there for a little more than an hour. Think about that. This is someone who has been close friends with Trump since the 1980s. This is someone who, during her time at Fox, was one of Trump's most loyal defenders and was a central figure in Dominion Voting System's lawsuit against Fox after she was found by the court to have made false statements regarding the 2020 election. That lawsuit cost her former network over $780 million. But if Pirro is now surprised that Trump might chuck her overboard because she won't back up his strange lies, well, I really don't know what to tell her. Just another Trump lackey who signs up to do anything Trump demands and then finds out, almost in spite of themselves, that, there are some lines even they won't cross. The controversy surrounding Ohio Republican Congressman Max Miller is growing. His ex-wife, Emily Moreno, daughter of Ohio Republican Senator Bernie Moreno, accused Mr. Miller of domestic violence against her and potentially her 2-year-old daughter. As an ongoing legal battle for custody of Miller's daughter has now become public, multiple outlets have surfaced allegations of years of violent behavior, misogyny, and verbal abuse against multiple women. Miller has denied it all while railing against his ex-wife. As the New York Times puts it, Miller's recent conduct has become a source of frustration in the president's circle. Many of them view his political problems as ones of his own making and his to fix. It looks like Miller understood those lines in the Times article as a message from the White House to fight back even more strenuously and publicly, because Trump has notoriously expressed his support for male politicians facing misconduct allegations from women, some of them horrible, if they fight back. From Brett Kavanaugh to Pete Hegseth to Roy Moore in Alabama, Trump sees them as warriors, winners, fighters. Well, this time, Congressman Miller seems to have understood exactly what he thinks he needed to do to get back in Trump's favor. So he released what I gotta say is a kind of unhinged social media video blaming his ex-wife for everything. For his part, Senator Moreno responded to that video with this post, quote, this is the first time he's sort of publicly commented, Max Miller needs serious psychological help. He is a danger to my daughter, and I hold my breath every minute he has custody of my granddaughter. if there are any basic standards of character required to hold elected office, Max Miller fails them. He should not serve in the House of Representatives. Michelle Goldberg is an opinion columnist with the New York Times. She detailed the Democratic response to abuse and rape accusations by then Maine Senate candidate Graham Plattner. Adam Servour is a staff writer at The Atlantic. His latest piece is titled The Masculinity Scam, the Manosphere's Campaign Strategy, and they both join me now. This, Michelle, really blew up over the weekend. It's sort of long simmering, the things that are alleged, and particularly in police reports. So these are sort of documents. And again, I want to be clear here, there's an ugly custody battle happening. We do not know what happened. We're reporting on what the allegations are. He denies it. There are some documents like police reports and things like that we're drawing on. But what do you make of the developments now after this was sort of simmering for a while and then now it's no longer simmering?
Well, I mean, I think even the fact that it was simmering for so long shows how radically different the standards in the two parties are, right? Because there was, for a long time, there is a whole bunch of Republicans who have, these sort of really shady, at least allegations against them. There is, another Republican from Florida who has also been accused of domestic violence, revenge porn, sorts of, there is a guy running as a Republican in Texas who has said, about, this isn't abusive, but it is kind of wildly misogynist, has said about kind of moms who get involved politically, he said, just because you let somebody cream pie you doesn't mean I have to give and I won't say the obscenity about your political opinions. The fact is there are so many of these guys in the Republican Party that in some sense they fade into the background. Now with this coming to the fore, the fact that there is a police report, the fact that there is finally the father-in-law, who's a Republican senator, speaking out about it, and the fact that the deadline is just days away if they're going to replace them, I think again shows that this is extraordinarily serious. You cannot imagine a situation in which a Democrat with this set of facts would find any support in the party, but the Republican Party is pretty dedicated to impunity for these sorts of men.
Adam, I want to play you the Miller video because there's two things going on. One, I just think to Michelle's point, like this snippet of it says to me that it's not just him, but there's zero self-awareness and no one around him that can tell him how this sounds, which itself seems to me to be part of the problem. Take a listen to what he said.
If I had assaulted her, would she have offered to cook me dinner 6 days later? Would she have invited me to spend an afternoon at the playground with her and our daughter? Would she have written that we were in a friendlier place? No, she wouldn't have, ladies and gentlemen.
Adam, what does it say to you that he recorded that video and put that out thinking that was going to be a strong rebuttal?
Yeah, I think that any woman who was afraid of her spouse would have done all of those things. And I think anybody who's ever had to deal personally with a situation like that would recognize just how weird it is that he is presenting that as some kind of exoneration, as sort of proving that he didn't do the things that he's accused of doing. And to be clear, if he did those things, he's not just not fit for office, he's fit for going to prison. I mean, some of the things that are being described here are actual crimes, not just sort of, abusive behavior. But the reality is that the Republican Party, particularly at the upper echelons, is a party that believes that men are people and women are things. And their way of enforcing conformity with this ideology is to make men feel insecure if they're not hurting and exploiting people who are weaker than them. And so if a man abuses his spouse, someone like Donald Trump is going to view it as weakness if you're not like, well, that's my right, or I'm allowed to do that, or something like that, or even in this case, simply denying the allegations in such a way that makes it clear that, they might actually be true. Because the underlying principle being reaffirmed here is that it should not be, you should not be ejected from public life just because you do horrible things to your spouse or your children.
Yeah, and let me stay with you for a second, Adam, then I'll come back to you, Michelle. But Trump was was asked, and of course he was like, he expressed essentially empathy for Max Miller, and Tim Miller made this joke about like the only empathy you ever see from him like come out is when it's about a man being accused of a terrible thing that he did for women. It's like the only register where he ever could be like, I feel for that person, is literally in that circumstance, and it just, you can set your clock to it. And this is a case in which Stephanie Grisham, who worked for him, says she told Donald Trump and Melania that this individual had abused her. And here we are.
Oh.
Well, again, you know, as an ideological principle, Donald Trump does not believe that abusing women should force you out of public life. He thinks it should be okay to do those things. And that is a consistent ideological principle that you have pointed out. He has expressed before, but also in a bipartisan way, even the Democrats are accused of horrible behavior, even when their whole party is throwing them under the bus. You know, you can always get a sympathetic quote from Donald Trump about women he can't do it, or, you know, they're treating him poorly.
Yeah, he turned around on Platter and was like, well, he's in a tough spot as soon as the allegation came out. But on your point, Michelle, about what is tolerated, there's an ethics report today about Chuck Edwards, and I gotta say, this is really, can I just show this one? Did you see this one? That one of the things is that he invited a staffer to a date by sending her a puzzle that she had to then put together, which then on the puzzle she had completed was a handwritten note inviting her to go to an Adam Sandler show. My track record with you for comedy is not very good. Perhaps this will help me redeem myself. He will be at the Lenovo Center. I'd like to catch up. And I just gotta say, in the annals of inappropriate, I shouldn't laugh, but in the annals of sexual harassment by bosses, making the person you're hitting on, who's your staffer, put a puzzle together to decode a message in which you're asking them out has to be some new record.
I mean, yes, you can just like imagine the sinking feeling that you're getting as you sort of fit into that. Yeah, and again, I mean, you know, and yes, I mean, I'm very glad that there was at least an ethics committee investigation. But I think, you know, it's worth noting that Graham Plattner is a household name in this country for sort of anybody who pays attention to politics. You know, Corey Mills and Max Miller and Brendan Herrera, these guys just are not. There's a very different ecosystem.
Yes, an extremely different ecosystem. I think that has changed a little bit with the Max Miller story, but you're right. Corey Mills also deserves some scrutiny. We should stay on that, actually. There's some wild stuff happening in that race as well. Michelle Goldberg and Adam Serwer, great to have you both. Thank you. Stay tuned. In just a few minutes, Rachel Maddow will be speaking with Texas Democratic Senate nominee James Tallarico. We'll be right back.
We have a great group to get us started this afternoon. Joining us now, New York Times White House correspondent Maggie Haberman, who is byline on those reports. Maggie, of course, also co-author of the new book, Regime Change, Inside the Imperial Presidency of Donald Trump. It's a deserved bestseller. MS Now senior national security reporter David Rode, also with us, as well as senior advisor for the Lincoln Project and Mitt Romney's chief strategist for his 2012 presidential campaign, Stuart Stevens, and former senior executive in the counterterrorism division of the FBI, and MS Now national security and intelligence analyst Christopher O'Leary. Thanks again for everyone joining us this afternoon. Maggie, I will start with you. You had some blockbuster reporting in recent days about the rush to turn this Qatari jet, this gift. The gift itself raised so many questions from so many. Gift to President Trump. He wanted it as the new Air Force One in time for the nation's birthday a few weeks back. Take us behind the scenes, please, Maggie, about some of the corners that were perhaps cut and some of the security concerns that were then raised.
So, John, there's a couple of aspects here, and my colleagues and I reported on how, look, it's been known that President Trump wanted to fly this Qatari gifted jet to the U.S. that he plans to take with him when he leaves office, reportedly for his presidential library. He wanted it as a bridge option because the Boeing commissioned 2 new Air Force Ones are not going to be ready, most likely until after he leaves office. So in order to do that, they had to take the fastest routes possible on certain security aspects of this plane. You know, my colleagues and I went down the list of things that are not visible on the new Qatari jet compared to, say, the older Air Force Ones. I think we need to be clear. It's possible there are things that we can't see, John, on the plane that we don't know of. But this was ready to be flown from the time that it was beginning to be worked on till it was rolled out less than a year, and in fact, quite less than a year. And so the expectation of White House officials last year in the lead up to the development of this plane was that it was only going to be able to be flown domestically or to locations abroad, but where there was no conflict zone and where there was a U.S. airbase. Turkey would obviously be pushing it a bit, and there was no U.S. airbase there. He ended up flying to the U.K. for that purpose, but this is going to continue to raise all kinds of questions. And remember, as you know well, it is not just the president who's on that plane, it's his staff and journalists and Air Force members and others.
Yeah, no, there's no question. I mean, even just, Maggie, you and I have both been on the plane a number of times covering this president and others, and you could just see there are noticeable differences. Now, of course, we don't know everything, but certainly there were enough concerns raised that he didn't take it home from that NATO summit, particularly after the Iran conflict sparked up again. So, Maggie, we do want to ask, the White House is pushing back somewhat on this. Walk us through some of their reporting, what are some of their arguments that they say, hey, this jet, everything is going as it should?
Look, they've continued to say that that the plane is safe, that there is no risk to the president, that they have made sure that, I'm paraphrasing here, so forgive me, but that the modifications are going to keep the president and everybody else flying aboard this plane safe. And I wouldn't expect them to say anything other than that. And there are, as you and I both know, John, legitimate reasons why there are certain aspects of presidential security that the government's simply never going to talk about. However, this is a plane that, it's a 13, 14-year-old plane. It's not a brand new plane, as the White House has said. This was a plane that was gifted under unusual circumstances at best. It is a plane that is expected to go leave with the president when he leaves office, and hundreds of millions of dollars have been spent to upgrade it, and now it is going back in to be, as the president put it,
he's not going to need a plane when he's sitting in prison.
We don't quite know what that means, but he said it's going to take about a month, as did White House officials. It's a little hard to understand what kind of security upgrades could be accomplished in that time that would be meaningful, but we will see.
But also, David, taking it offline for a month or whatever it ends up being, sort of an admission that the reporting was right, and that, of course, this plane was not ready for at least that kind of journey.
Yeah, and it's terrific work by Maggie and the reporters from the Times. Look, Air Force One is also supposed to be a command center. When the 9/11 attacks happened, George W. Bush was in Florida, but then was flying around the country. So the communication systems you have on this plane and the anti-missile defenses are critical for the security of the country, not just the president. And I'm worried this is part of a pattern where, and the piece talks about Trump's just fixation on how quickly this had to be turned around, and that the aides around the president seem to fear, and you and Maggie know this better than me, giving him blunt advice. So there's experts from the Air Force who know that it doesn't have the capabilities. There's the Secret Service concerns, and there's other policy issues we can talk about, but again, is Donald Trump, does he have people around him who stand up to him and warn him about pushing things like this and the national security implications to it? And then it's also hundreds of millions of dollars that taxpayers are spending.
Right, and Stuart, just please remind those watching just how unusual this gift is. We've never had a president accept something like this, even though he says it's on behalf of the country, but he's made clear that when he leaves office, he's taking his jet with him.
Yeah, it's just another example about how we've kind of normalized these standards. The vice president, Agnew, got kicked out of office for taking $10,000. So this president is taking a very nice jet. And one of the things I think just points to the hollowness of all this rhetoric from the White House is, because there was an unfortunate incident at the White House Correspondents' Center, they tried to use that as an excuse why the White House had to be torn down, the East Wing. So it's sort of weird, but this obsession with security. But not here. The president loves his plane, it's a very cool plane, and it's more comfortable, I bet, than the old Air Force One, so he wants to fly it. So, it just is another example of the hypocrisy of the White House and why you really can't take anything that they say at face value. And if anything happened to Donald Trump, it would be catastrophic for the country. It's risky, it's dangerous, it's irresponsible, but...
You keep that fucking opinion to yourself.
So, Maggie, of course, this comes as there is this new threat to the president. Iran has threatened his life before. We know President Trump keenly aware of that. That's sort of an animating factor for him at times. But that's part of the bind that he finds himself in. I wrote this week for The Atlantic. I know you have covered on this as well, that he finds himself in this situation with no good options. There was real consideration end of last week to dramatically escalate the war again. They backed off of it. Talk to us about why the president decided to do that and what could come next.
So what could come next is the big question, John, and I read your piece. We at the Times also have done several versions of it. Jonathan Swan and I reported in our book about how Trump took the country to war and just how much he believed on a gut feeling this was going to go well and it was going to go quickly. Those really were the factors. He was fresh off of this military operation in Venezuela, whatever anybody thinks of the foreign policy issues related to it, snatching a head of a sovereign state in his pajamas in the middle of the night. It was a successful operation from the U.S. terms. And so he had huge faith in how this was going to go. It is not going that way. It has not gone quickly. We are now into month 5, or about to enter month 5 of what was supposed to be 6 to 8 weeks-ish. Munitions are low. We don't know the specific numbers, but that is just not in dispute, although the president keeps saying otherwise. There are real questions about how they are handling the casualty numbers and how honest this government is being about that, or change their computations or descriptions around it. So he leaves himself with very few options that will actually be effective, one of which would be boots on the ground, which once he does that, it's very hard to do it in a way that would be a half measure, John, because he has repeatedly made these threats against this Iranian regime that was supposed to be much more willing to talk after the Ayatollah had been killed. So far, he is fighting this very asymmetrical fight against a leadership, some of them, not all of them, but some of them, who are not only willing to wait him out, not only willing to, in some cases, kill their own citizens, but also are less convinced by his threats. They absolutely have an economy that is really struggling. That is a pressure point, but that is also one that Iranians have shown they're willing to wait out to.
And Chris, to you now, if indeed this reporting is right, by the Times, Journal, other places, that the U.S. is down significantly in terms of supplies of these interceptor missiles that could be used to defend our allies in the Gulf, what does that say to you right now about military preparedness and, frankly, the leadership of Secretary Hegseth at the Pentagon?
Well, I think it's self-evident that Secretary Hegseth is out of his depth. He shouldn't be there. But it also tells you that it really limits the president's options. Now, the combat power that you have in the Gulf region, you have 2 Marine Expeditionary Units, which are 2,200 Marines each. But the battalion landing team for each of those, the combat power that would go ashore is actually only 1,200 Marines in each of those MUs. And then you have a brigade combat team from the 82nd Airborne, which is about 1,000 paratroopers. That is not nearly enough to do any real damage to the Iranians, and the Iranians know that. There's something called relative combat power when you're planning to do an offensive. And so for a basic military operation, if you are assaulting, you want to have 3-to-1 combat power against the defender. If you're going against a major, well-entrenched adversary, that goes to 6-to-1 to 8-to-1. If you're going against a major urban area, that becomes 10-to-1. Now, the Iranians have 600,000 troops in their military. They have another 200,000 members in the IRGC, many of which are Quds Force members, so elite members of the intelligence and special operations community. They have another 350,000 reservists that they can call up who've served previously in the Iranian military. So the calculus here is really something that the president doesn't have any options, and he's lost all of his strength and leverage and legitimacy going into these talks moving forward.
And David, there's certainly been some Republicans and some influential voices on the right, conservative media types, who are urging him to get out, just cut and run. But quickly walk us through what that would mean if the U.S. were willing to abandon this conflict and leave the status quo.
Hey, I'm going to be right back.
A huge victory for Iran. They've defeated the world's most powerful country. They still have the nuclear material. They'll have control of the strait. They can collect millions and millions of dollars in fees. And I think Iran is going to wait this out. I think they are not going to make any major compromise until the midterm elections, roughly 3.5 months from now, because they have outmaneuvered Trump. And I think he's put himself in a really, really difficult position.
You know, you live long enough, you realize that there are some days, there are some times when the bill comes due. You know, you've done things in the past, perhaps ill-advised things you kind of knew at the time weren't a good idea, and sometimes you are able to skate by for a little while. You get away with that stuff for a little while, but eventually you learn in this life that the bill comes due. We're having one of those times in the news right now. So, for example, when we as a country elected this president, he decided, in his infinite wisdom, that he would immediately allow his top campaign donor, Elon Musk, to cut whole swaths of U.S. government capacity based on nothing but Elon Musk's own say-so and his gut feelings. So things that took decades, if not generations, to build up, some of these things, the gold standard government capacity for the whole world, President Donald Trump just said, hey, you're my top campaign donor. As far as I'm concerned, that gives you the right to sledgehammer the U.S. government to your heart's content. I don't care. You enjoy yourself. And that is how thousands of subject matter experts and forest rangers and specialist lawyers and prosecutors and scientists and it's how all these people lost their jobs and their careers in the U.S. government. But it's also how we as a country lost things like, say, a project that had been funded, that was shovel-ready, expertly planned, much needed, ready to go, a project to build fire breaks in the Superior National Forest in Minnesota. Elon Musk and Donald Trump did not care enough or were not bright enough to understand what a project like that might conceivably be for, and so they ixnayed it. You know, even as Trump blames wildfires anywhere on Earth on people not cleaning up the forest so there would be less to burn, Trump, in his wisdom, literally stopped funding last
Can't get into my kitchen
for the
right now.
shovel-ready project to build fire breaks in the Superior National Forest in Minnesota.
Again, I might come back later on today.
So it would be easier to fight any fire that did break out. He and Elon Musk
Farming
stopped the
Simulator
funding of that
22,
project.
Michigan Farms
So
Map,
now,
Schafer's Ag Service
the bill
Part
has come due.
109,
The Superior
Bravo.
National Forest in Minnesota,
it's accurate
as
replica
we
of the farm I
speak,
grew up on.
is
Thanks for
on
watching,
fire.
and we'll see y'all later.
Thank
Bye.
you, Doge. Thank you, Donald Trump. That was the Washington Post reporters doing good work this weekend, tracing the line between those fires burning right now in Minnesota after Trump last year stopped the funding that would have made that forest less likely to burn. That is the bill coming due. Similarly, cyclospora